Hello, you know the pressure's getting the Prime Minister when he's doing this in Parliament today to the man who has better poll numbers than him.
Opposition.
What is wrong with you? Something wrong with you?
Order.
Yeah, that's as childish as it's getting. Now, of course, this government has got plenty of things that are, well, the wrong side of issues when it comes to Australians. Poll after poll have told us that not just is the gap narrowing, but the honeymoon is way behind, and we're now in a scenario where for many Australians, they want the Labor Party and the Prime Minister to sleep on the couch. That doesn't mean that they don't give up the fight in question time. It doesn't mean that they don't have a media that, generally speaking, will try to amplify their message all day, every day, and make everything about Peter Dutton. To that in a second. But, as you've heard, the polls, yet another one, tells us that if there was an election this weekend, the Liberal Party would win at 51-49. Now, of course, the big asterisk there is, well, that might be the national result, unless those teal seats move, well, it would be most likely a minority government, but at 49 versus 50, 1%, and a primary vote at just 32%, the minority government would not just be a couple of seats, it'd be half a dozen or maybe more. Now, for the Liberal Party, the reason they're at 51 is because their primary vote is now in the 40s. In any other normal election, that would be the beginnings of a potential victory. But again, the asterisk is always the teals. I say that because I don't want to get your expectations up. And two, we all know there are plenty of people that will run off to the umpire. Misinformation, but still really important. But then there's this question. It's the same result, but a different poll. It is an extreme majority of Australians who believe we are headed in the wrong direction. This one comes out via Freshwater and the Financial Review, but as you can see there, the number of Australians who think we're headed in the wrong direction is now close to 60%. The number of those who believe that we are in the right direction, well, it is in the 30s there. The number that remain unsure, well, it's a small enough number, but it's not enough that if it all went to the right side of things, it would start to level out. Australians know this country is in the wrong place, and it is there because of the current government. Because they told us a lie about power bills, because they told us a lie about cost of living and so much more. Well, we got more news that reinforces the poll numbers, and again, they most likely will make them worse, if not stay in the position where Labor is losing right now. Today, major energy retailers came forward to tell us about the number of people who are struggling to pay their power bills. In literally a football stadium of people are now starting to fall behind and are reaching out to them to say, I can't pay. Two of Australia's largest power companies have revealed the combined number of customers in their hardship programs, i.e. they're paying back cents on the dollar, has soared by 35,000, or up by 40% in the past year. Origin's disclosed that their number is now 97,000. That's up from 71,000 a year ago, 37% increase. Meanwhile, AGL has reported that the number on theirs has gone up by the best part of 8,500. That's nearly 27,500 people whose power bills come from AGL that are currently in a scenario where they are paying back cents in the dollar. They are not paying back the full bill each and every month or each and every quarter, depending on how it is actually calculated. Combined, the two retailers have got 125,000 customers in hardship. That was 90,000 this time last year. Now remember, we were told last year that was as bad as it gets. Well, of course, it has got worse. The python that is cost of living has only ever got tighter, and the number of people who are in trouble is ever growing. Another example is the number of people that are having difficulties paying back their mortgages. We keep being told that politically the 13th rate rise will be the killer for the Albanese government. I would suggest, as we have said, all the way through, maybe the 12th, the 11th, the 10th, the 9th or the 8th may well have also been just as damning. The government's in trouble. It's in trouble in issues of its own making, and most importantly, it is in trouble after failing to deliver on its promises of everything gets better, when the reality is if you are paying off a house or just living in one that needs power, everything is getting worse. Now, specifically, another thing worth pointing out in all of these polls are the issues, because the issues are horrible for the government. They are way behind on cost of living. They are way behind on taxation. They are way behind on all of the key issues that we know people care about. But the one that supposedly was absolutely a third rail, an electric fence which was going to do in the opposition, is all matters to do with who comes to the country and the manner in which they come. Well, this poll, which was asking the question when the press gallery was going nuts, it shows the Liberal Party, 41% of people saying that they're the best ones to handle it. Immigration, 24%. Now, of course, they'll tell us this is just the hangover of clueless Claire O'Neill, who's now going on to stuff up the housing portfolio, or the idiot Andrew Giles. But, of course, it's not just the people, it's the policies, it's the ideas. It's the number of people that have been brought into the country while all of those other problems are taking place, where the rental queues are around the corner. And if you call 000, you may or may not get an ambulance because they may be stuck at a hospital. Because every single state government, all of which bar one are Labor, have been running record ramping. But of course, to talk about this is oh so horribly racist. Now, I cannot believe that the Labor Party decided to keep going on the issues of last week, in and around whom is going to be able to come to the country from what is happening in the Middle East right now. Now, the Liberal Party, they had question after question after question. They're more than happy to talk about this for another week, because while the press gallery think this is political death, we all know it's not, by almost a margin of 2-1.
Australians are feeling disappointed in the Prime Minister and questioning his competence and honesty. She's just dished out on the previous government. She hasn't answered the question which was relevant to what maybe her government was doing.
But you can't leave out the middle of one sentence that you're quoting and pretend that that is an accurate reflection of what has been said by the person you are quoting.
Now, the Labor Party think that their best defence here is, again, as the Prime Minister showed us, to say there's something weird with you guys. They think that all politics is the same. Whatever's being practised in places like the United States will automatically kick in here because there are so many people that are on social media. Well, of course, they're not, and you can't tell people that the other guys are strange or weird when it's your government that promised so much but has delivered the exact opposite. That said, they try.
On Election Day 2022.
That's right.
In an extraordinary act, the Leader of the Opposition at 1:26 p.m. was busy tweeting out information that was national security, an attempt to politicise once again information that the then government had.
This is the most divisive opposition leader that we have seen.
Kerry Packer said you only get one Alan Bond in your lifetime. Well, I reckon John Sector's worked out you only get one Peter Dutton in your lifetime.
Really? Now, this is a sign of how the government knows it's in trouble, because it has to appeal to its most hardcore supporters that we're still in the fight. There's not an awful lot of people in the middle who even know half of what has just been said. The reference to tweets on Election Day is, of course, that there was an illegal boat arrival. Of course, all of this is completely forgotten, and was, of course, the responsibility of the Home Affairs Minister to be able to make that public. Now, of course, any tweet coming out on Election Day is hardly going to move people, especially when about a third of the country votes early. But who even remembers? That's a super deep cut for the backbench, a super deep cut for the media. And, of course, we know there are plenty in the media who want to pretend that somehow Peter Dutton crossed a line that cannot be crossed and will take Australia into the deepest and darkest parts of our history. You know, the lady who says that we are a racist country. The lady who, of course, believes that apparently we're going to be turning on people who don't look like her when it comes to auctions. Still waiting for any proof of that, but of course she'll never have to apologise. Any bringing up of this is unhelpful, as she said, for her or the ABC. Well, she writes an opinion piece that appears in the Financial Review, is also replicated on the ABC's website. Peter Dutton's call to ban refugees from Gaza has proved too much for some MPs. Now, there are some studies that tell us that only about a third of people actually click on the articles or actually read beyond the headline. The MPs are not MPs of the coalition. So the suggestion is that somehow people are nervous inside the coalition. They're not, because they know when it comes to votes how this has played out, and has played out for more than a quarter of a century. And while, yes, there will be days when some people, if they go too far, I'll call them out, on the principle of what's being discussed here, the Liberal Party has been able to quite correctly pull this into a question of vetting. But back to the media coverage. And then there was this very subtle illustration in the Channel 9 newspapers today, of course, that Peter Dutton is the man who's throwing petrol on the fire. The fire, presumably, is some sort of latent racism that exists in all of us. Because, of course, Australians are racist because they voted 60-40 hell no to a change in the Constitution. They are racist because they want a say in what type of refugees come to the country. These, of course, are the types of people who are not willing to give up their tennis courts to help fix the housing solution, or, of course, to be able to house a refugee in their spare bedrooms. No interest in that. The Dutton tipping point. Will we allow the next election to be all about race? The next election will not be all about race. This, of course, is written by a bloke who wrote a book about Scott Morrison. Ooh, scary. And, of course, worked for Rudd and Gillard. But the reality is that what I just pointed out before are the things that this election will be fought over. Things like the cost of living, things like interest rates, things like the managing of finances. Yes, for some, they will want to have a position where we should remove all references to any sort of person double-checking people at the borders, but those people already vote Greens. They are not up for grabs. Anyway, let's get into the fear-mongering because, of course, when all else fails, when the government's on its back foot, when they're turning around saying there's something odd about you, oh, he's like Tim Walz, it's like we're all in America. The coalition has little in the way of serious policy. And so, brick by brick, we are watching the campaign built out of little more than divisive statements. Because, of course, unless you fully support everything this government is doing, then you are divisive. If you want to stand up for the country that you didn't realise was being changed yesterday, and you say, no, let's keep some of the status quo, culture war! The common denominator of which in this politics of race, because, of course, if you talk about immigration and how many people should come into the country when there aren't enough places for people to rent or there aren't enough ambulances for people to call, racist. Nuclear energy is the obvious exception, but the very weakness of that policy proves the point. What point? That you're trying to pretend that, again, your view of the average Australian, just like Lefty Laura Tingle, is that somehow inside each and every Australian, regardless of whether they were born here, came here or anything else, well, there's some sort of little racist monster desperately waiting to be fed after midnight, like a gremlin. Of course, the issue, and the reason why the issue works politically, is because it is a conversation about vetting. Now, again, last week I copped it, and I won't double down on it for the next 10 days in a row. You saw what I had to say last week. But they have changed the conversation from what was happening last week into the one that is much safer ground, which is that Australia believes that we should be able to decide who comes to the country and the manner in which they come. This was clear since the 2001 federal election. And while lefties believe that there is a revolution every time they get elected, and every time they don't, somehow they were cheated out of it by the memes, the fundamentals are that rather, whether you were born here or whether you came here, you want to make sure that the people who join us here in the greatest country in the world are the right type of people who are just as committed to this country as anyone who's been here for months, years or generations. That's why the Liberal Party is excited that they get another week in Parliament to drive this one home. And as much as the Gillard leftovers in the gallery or the lefties who desperately want this to be the issue of latent racism yet again on display, the reality is that the Libs have gone, how good is this? We get another week of this issue.
Prime Minister was also tricky in saying the screening processes his government uses are the same as the coalition used, when that turns out to be completely untrue.
Refugee visas take longer, and given what's happening right now and the dangers presented, the view was to try and get people out as quickly as you can. Isn't this why Australians are disappointed in the Prime Minister and now saying he is incompetent and dishonest?
And perhaps the greatest giveaway about exactly the political rock on which the opposition is standing right now, as opposed to the shifting sands of racism, is that there was a term which was used by Peter Dutton a few weeks ago. I suggest he brings it back when he refers to a weak and rattled Prime Minister. A rattled Prime Minister is the one who behaved like he did in question time today. A weak Prime Minister is one who's not able to stand up for the values of the country or even explain the process that is currently being used or promise that that process will have the highest standards possible, which again means the opposition is more than happy to do this for yet another week.
I've got a feeling that the PM won't turn up. He'll stay in his office watching on the television because he's gutless. He won't come in here and defend himself. That is weakness at its worst.
Now, I never sugarcoat it. I tell you the data, I tell you the truth. The reality of the Liberal and National Party being able to get to 76 seats, a big block in that is the number of Teals. Now, these Teal electorates all voted yes last year. These are the ones that have representatives like Zali Steggall who want to stand up and say, racist, 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 because, you see, they know they only need to get a quarter of the primary vote in their seats and the preferences will all flow their way. And unless the Liberal Party, because everyone is essentially running against them, wins on primary votes, and that ain't happening in many seats for any major political party, because, mark my words, one of the great narratives that you'll hear about between now and the next election is a thing called double haters, the people who hate all forms of major party politics. Now, of course, all of this is a way of trying to say, well, the blue team's as bad as the red team, regardless of the fact that the red team promised a world that would be better, yet it all got worse. This will, of course, be yet another narrative attempt from those in the media who told us that this was an election-winning budget. But if that was the case, could somebody please tell me why the polls keep saying that the government is behind, way behind, on things like inflation? Oh, well, they've decided to come up with a $300 credit, meaning that every mansion or every one-bedroom house in the country will all get the same power bill relief of $25 a week. Yet, why isn't everyone more excited? Why isn't the average Australian cheering because they got $15 a week if you're earning about $45,000 in tax cuts? No, of course, just like so many other policies, it's billions of dollars of taxpayers' money so they can have a slogan to go to an election. Desperately hoping that the Australian media will be as weak as the American media, and as long as you call the other guy weird, they'll win. Well, thankfully, Australian politics is above that, even for the people who basically don't pay too much attention. Because, you see, those people remember what they were promised and they hate what they've got. It's always nice to see a bit of old school language reappearing. And you know, every now and then on this program, you love the shows where it's a Conservative couple of guests, and I call it No Sooks, No Lefties. Oh, the pearl clutching that happens when I use the word sook. Because it's such an 80s dad reference when a kid is crying over spilt milk. Now, you and I both know what a sook is. Yes, it's somebody who's weak. Yes, it's somebody who complains. It's not somebody with a legitimate mental health disorder. It's not a way of minimising somebody with legitimate feelings, but we all know what a sook is. Well, interestingly, in the past week, the word sook has returned to Parliamentary Hansard. Both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party have used the word in the past week. Barnaby Joyce, in fact, doubled down on it in a conversation with my dear friend Andrew Bolt last week.
Anthony Albanese is, as a Prime Minister, he's weak. He's also a sook, by the way, a big sook.
And then, of course, the Labor Party, well, they turned around today and they went, OK, let's find a word that'll eventually work. And the Arts Minister, parading as the border czar of Australia, well, he decided to reach into the bag and call Peter Dutton a sook.
And the Leader of the Opposition has moved this motion today because the man is irresponsible and a sook, and the country doesn't like either.
Oh, how offensive. Now, while I'm very glad that this common use word, which has been used in the suburbs of Australia for as long as I've been alive, and probably yourself as well, and we all know what it means, and sure, it ain't a compliment, that this word, well, it has automatic cut-through with people, which is why both sides are starting to use it. But I wanted to show you how our parliament works. You see, when a Conservative stands up and uses the word sook, this is what happens.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Can I ask that be withdrawn?
Order. To assist the House, I'm going to invite... Thank you, the member for Newark.
Withdraw.
But when Labor use it, no such appeal for it to be withdrawn. In fact, they all laugh.
And the Leader of the Opposition has moved this motion today because the man is irresponsible and a sook. I move that the debate be adjourned.
The question is the debate be adjourned. I'll put the question. Those opinion say aye.
Now you love it. I get to call you one, but you can't call me one. But I'm allowed to say there's something wrong with you, there's something weird. Now again, the word sook, it is not the highest word of which we can use for those that we disagree with or sometimes that do carry on like pork chops. But if sook's okay, wait till they start using the word Sheila. How offensive. Now, as you know, Fatima Payman was most recently on the air here last week in an excellent documentary, very well produced by Jonathan Lee. Fascinating conversation about the Muslim vote. That's all up at skynews.com.au. Agree, disagree? I just thought it was a really well produced piece of telly. Well, as you know, the reason that she is front and centre right now, she's getting the Australian story treatment. Oh my God, that's going to be so amazing. But unlike that, she of course had to answer some questions here. She of course has moved to the crossbench. She will be most likely a reliable vote for the Labor Party, but now she claims because she's all, independent and everything, that she'll be able to, call balls and strikes and won't always vote for what they have to vote for. There's a couple of things we do have to say, and I understand that she's being, elevated to some level of Australian politics that to criticise her will equal racism or sexism. You get all of the different words that'll be thrown at you, but if you're just a politician, then people are allowed to dissent from what you have to say. It's a sort of fundamental tenet of our democracy. But of course, Fatima Payman, well, she joined the Labor Party knowing that it has caucus rules, meaning if the party decides this is the policy, then that's the case, there are no exceptions. If you do so, you will be punished, which is why she lost a couple of committee spots, and then she, of course, decided, I'm out. But also, she applied for the job to be a senator, which means a legislator, which means a person who is passing the laws of our country that you and I have to abide by. Well, amazingly, last week there were a couple of votes where she didn't take a position. And of course this was not at all to do with not taking a position on controversial issues because that might come back to bite you. Oh no, it's apparently because she didn't have enough people around her to be able to read the legislation, to be able to vote yay or nay. Now, again, when you decide to leave major party politics, yes, there is going to be a period of time where you're not going to have the great team around you of dozens of colleagues and all of their staff and the collective brain, which is why you do think twice about these things. But in an interview in the Sydney Morning Herald, again in the lead up to the Australian story treatment in a couple of weeks' time, Fatima Payman is a woman in a bind. The newly independent senator is unshackled from having to follow the policy dictates of the Labor Party. But she says her desire to exercise her own judgment is being stymied by a lack of parliamentary staff, forcing her to abstain on voting on key issues. No, it's not because she doesn't want to be drawn on those issues and vote in a fashion which may create political, for want of a better term, enemies. No, it's because I'm not well informed enough. Well, what does that mean about her behaviour as a backbencher? Now, sure, she couldn't amend the legislation when she was a backbencher because, of course, the team all votes together. But very obviously, she wasn't listening to the speeches and she wasn't reading the documents. And there's an awful lot that happened every single day during a sitting week. But let's be honest, in the huge amount of weeks when, as a senator, you don't have the same pressures on you as, say, an MP, you might be able to, say, read some of this stuff before it comes in. But again, back to the story. It's like moving from this massive corporate world to one where you're a small business owner doing everything on your own. It's very overwhelming. Now, of course, the reality here is that she's not doing it all on her own. As a senator, I believe that you have as many as 5 people that are in your staffing, but many of those, of course, are for your main job, which is to allegedly represent the people of Western Australia. She continues. It's important that I do justice to my constituents, and that requires me to have the resources to do my job. So despite the fact that I was elected by the Labor Party and the Labor Party had the resources, because I've decided to walk away from the Labor Party, I should have the same resources as the Labor Party to be able to decide whether I do or don't support what the Labor Party is suggesting. One more here. In the best interests of everyone, she says, for this staffing issue to be resolved, including the government. She wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, not at all threatening, to say that if I don't get the extra members of staff, that I don't have a disproportionate number of staffers to the other people in the Parliament, well, that I would vote against your legislation. She's not here to be obstructionist, she says. Now, of course, process can be boring for many people, but it is interesting when it comes to Fatima Payman, because we heard a couple of weeks ago that she decided to hire Glenn Drury, who at last time I checked I think is based out of Victoria, to be the Chief of Staff to the Senator from Western Australia. Now, of course, he is famously known as a person who has previously worked on the crossbench for people like Darren Hinch, so he knows how to negotiate legislation, no question. As the story was written up at the time there, in The Guardian, a couple of other quotes in and around all of this. As Chief of Staff, I'll be there to help her through this Machiavellian maze that is Parliament. It can be a whirling area of stress. It could also be very rewarding when you're trying to help people. OK, cool, fine, fair enough. I have no problems with Glenn Drury, nor do I have any problems with the preference whispering thing. That's the system. But I just think it is worth noting that when his services had been offered in the past, and there were stories about how this pitch was at the time recorded by a potential customer in the lead up to an election, this is what he said about his services and then also his role as a political staffer.
So since we're not at the table, cost for us getting elected, what is it?
If you win, you'll give me 55k. Everybody gives me 5k as a member of the family. Okay. I know my way around the Parliament. I know my way around the legislation. I know all the players. I would urge you to take me on as an advisor and consultant. You can pay me through the administration fund and I'd be charging you roughly $1,000 a week. And I think you probably only need me for a year and a couple of weeks.
Again, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing illegal about all of this, and I make no such suggestions. Again, my dealings with Glenn Drury over the years have always been positive. He will be unhappy that I'm making this point right now, but it is interesting that a part of the pitch that was revealed in those news stories a few months ago, that working as a staffer is part of the overall relationship, seemingly, when it comes to preference whispering. Now, we know that potentially he will be involved in the preference whispering of whatever Fatima Payman is planning to do. Now, whether that will extend to some new party, we'll all find out together. But you see, this is the difference between people who have covered politics for 5 minutes and those of us that have been around for many years. It's called institutional memory. It is amazing how many people who profess to know way more about politics than dumb old me somehow don't remember the stories that were there before they turned up. Because you see, there was a world before many of these people did turn up. I know it's not as important, not as impressive, but it is worth remembering every now and then. Now, of course, for Peter Dutton to be in a position where a couple of polls have said that they're 51-49 at the very least, if not leading, then they are competitive going into the next federal election. There is a great difference, though, between the success that he is seemingly having as an opposition leader, as is much of the shadow cabinet and his team. There are huge problems with the machine that is the Liberal Party. Now, again, I'm not a member of it, but I obviously want Peter Dutton to do well, which means he has to have a machine behind him that can actually deliver on the fight for government. Now, Peter Dutton and the people around him should be given all power in the world to have total ability to make sure that the Liberal parties in all of the different states are all aligned with the same goal. It starts in New South Wales. Now, the New South Wales Liberal Party has for too long been eating itself alive. It has, for too long, embarrassed itself with these fights that mean they miss the main game. Last week, we all saw, not just in Australian news, but actually international news, that the incompetence of the New South Wales Liberal Party meant that they didn't fill out the forms in time for the New South Wales local government elections. Now, one half of the team who runs the New South Wales Liberal Party, well, they were demanded into the office, you're gone, sacked for not filling out the paperwork. Well, why is the New South Wales president of the Liberal Party still there? Don Harwin. Dancing Donny Harwin, hey? Of course, there's no excuse. He should go too. Because the New South Wales Party is a mess. It's a mess because of its factions, where, oh, well, it's my version of the Liberal Party versus your version of the Liberal Party. They end up suing each other like they did during various state and federal elections. And it means that the candidates who should be pre-selected right now for the federal election are not being pre-selected. It means the machine that has to fight the Labor Party, the establishment media, the Greens and all the rest of it is not fit for purpose. It's not fit for purpose in New South Wales, and it should be taken over by the federal authorities. I would suggest the same in Victoria as well. Because while it didn't get the same attention, it's the same problem. You see, the Victorian Liberal Party, they missed a deadline too. This was for their proposals about what should happen about which seats should stay and go at a federal election. A party to be able to form government needs to be able to contest an election. For it to be able to win an election, it has to have a machine around it, a machine that is fit for purpose, a machine that is ready to go. And the Liberal Party at the machine level, at the state level, is not good enough. The one at the federal level, well, it won in 2019. It got clobbered in 2022, but it could fight. And with the polls and the issues on their side, it should be the best version of the machine possible. So do what the Labor Party does. When you have dysfunctional state divisions, get on top and take them over. Latest from America, and let's follow the money when it comes to the bookies. It's back to level pegging now between the second coming, that is, of course, Obama in a pantsuit, and Donald Trump. Now, it seems that Arizona has come ever so slightly back his way, but still she's in front in Pennsylvania and potentially in front in Nevada. If that's the case, well, of course, she'll become the president. But polling, which is starting to now keep up with the times as opposed to just be polling from a couple of weeks ago, is now starting to show that on a national level, Trump is very close or in some cases leading. Now, before you say, oh, of course, that's a Fox News poll, the same poll a couple of weeks ago said Harris was leading. But if you have a look at just how tight this thing is right now, the Real Clear Politics average, which is an average of all the polls, shows Harris nationally up by 1.4. Biden in 2020 was up by between 2 and 4 points. Once you throw in RFK, well then, and other minority candidates, Harris still in front. But in the states that matter, Trump just. And of course, point one is beyond margin of error. It literally is a coin toss. The issue that does particularly worry those of us that would like to see Trump defeat Kamala Harris because of her crazy policies, and I'll get to that in a second. In terms of who do they like more, well, people, according to polling, like Harris more than Trump, meaning, of course, that when the Democratic convention kicks off, by the time you wake up tomorrow, and we'll talk about it tomorrow night after Joe Biden gets his warm hug and legendary farewell and all of that other garbage. But, of course, don't forget something that may remind us of some of the problems that exist in and around the DNC, is that while they'll try to tell us everything's okay, could somebody please explain why the city that is hosting the convention is currently boarding up as many windows as it can because there's going to be wild protests. Sure, it won't be as bad as 1968 when literally police started firing at the protesters, but it ain't going to be fun. Now, may I suggest that most likely the only network that will actually show you what's going on in the protesters tomorrow will be the Fox News network. We'll show them to you again. Everyone else will just pretend they're not here. There's nothing to see. Meantime, Kamala Harris actually put some ideas on the table. Sure, she did it on Friday, American time, which was Saturday, our time, secretly hoping that still in the summertime everyone wasn't paying attention. Even the Washington Post said some of her ideas about price controls when it comes to the economy are nothing more than a gimmick. She also has this brand new line that apparently she's just fallen from the sky. She's never had a job before running for president.
And when I am president, it will be a day one priority to fight to bring down prices. I will take on big corporations that engage in illegal price gouging.
And as Trump says,
Kamala laid out her so-called economic plan. She says she's going to lower the cost of food and housing starting on day one. But day one for Kamala was 3.5 years ago. So why didn't she do it then?
Game on, baby. Let's wait, watch and see. No doubt they get a bump after the infomercial, but then if price gouging is apparently going to be the issue and we're going to blame the corporations when she was the deciding vote on trillions of dollars of economic stimulus, Bidenomics was working, somehow I think the people that are actually paying attention to what's happened in their lives, they won't fall for the BS.